The wind swept across the empty plains of Wyoming as Samuel Reed stood before the "For Sale" sign nailed to his family's gate. He was ready to give up everything until his horse's hoof struck the earth and revealed a secret buried beneath generations of silence. The wind swept across the Wyoming plains, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and forgotten summers. The old Reed Ranch sign creaked on the wooden gate, and beneath it hung another, freshly painted, painfully white. For sale. Samuel Reed stood by the fence, one boot pressed into the brittle soil. His hands were rough, his shirt faded from years of sun. He didn't need to read the words again. They'd been burned into his mind long before the paint had dried. Beyond the fence, the fields stretched out like an ocean gone to sleep. Grass turned the color of rust, and the air trembled with the hum of distant cicadas. Near the barn, Dusty, the old chestnut horse, shifted his weight and pawed at the ground. The sound of his hoof striking dry earth echoed through the emptiness. Nathan's voice came from the porch, tired and sharp. "Dad, the realtor called again. They've got a buyer lined up." Samuel didn't turn. "I heard." "You can't keep putting it off. We're out of time. The bills—" "I know the bills," Samuel cut in, his voice flat as the horizon. The boy fell silent. He was 20, maybe 21, too young to carry the bitterness already heavy in his eyes. He leaned against the porch post, watching his father as if trying to recognize the man he used to be. Inside the barn, the scent of hay and old leather clung to the air. Samuel reached for the saddle that once belonged to his father, brushing the dust from its surface. For a moment, he just stood there, his thumb tracing the worn stitching, remembering a time when the ranch was alive with laughter, when the fields were green and the barns full of promise. Now the fences were falling, the well was dry, and the bank was waiting. Dusty nudged him softly, the way he did when storms rolled in. The horse's breath warmed Samuel's neck, and something inside him cracked a little. "You're the last thing left here that still breathes, boy," he murmured. He stepped outside again. The afternoon sun had dipped low, turning everything the color of honey and fire. In the distance, the mountains crouched under a veil of haze. For a fleeting second, he imagined his father's shadow walking those fields, broad-shouldered, silent, proud. The thought twisted something deep in his chest. Nathan walked over, his hands in his pockets. "You can't live off ghosts, Dad. It's just land. Dirt and wood. It's not worth losing everything over." Samuel looked at him then, really looked. "It's more than dirt," he said quietly. "It's where everything we are was buried." Nathan shook his head, turned and walked back toward the house. The screen door slammed behind him, leaving the air trembling. The wind picked up again, scattering dust across the dry field. The "For Sale" sign creaked louder, like it was mocking the silence. Samuel stayed there, long after the sun disappeared, until only the faint outline of the barn and the sound of Dusty breathing beside him remained. He thought about the man he used to be, the promises he'd made to his father, promises to keep the land alive, no matter what came. But promises didn't pay debts, and pride didn't feed horses. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the land itself watching him, old, patient, disappointed. When the moon rose, Samuel took one last look at the dark outline of the barn, at the house his father had built with his bare hands, and whispered to no one, "Maybe tomorrow I'll call the realtor." Dusty snorted softly, pawing the ground once more, 3 times, like a heartbeat beneath the soil. The sound lingered, low and steady, and from somewhere deep beneath that dry, stubborn land, something shifted. The morning came pale and brittle, the kind of light that never truly warms the land. Samuel Reed sat at the kitchen table, a single cup of black coffee cooling beside a pile of bills. The edges of the papers curled, the ink from the bank's letters bleeding like bruises. Final notice. Foreclosure pending. The words stared back at him, merciless and quiet. Nathan entered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, phone in hand. "The bank called again," he said, his voice flat. "They said if we don't make a payment by Friday, they'll start the process." Samuel didn't look up. "I'll drive into town. Talk to them." "Talk?" Nathan let out a bitter laugh. "You've been talking for 6 months, Dad. They don't care about talk." The boy's words cut deeper than he knew. Samuel glanced at the window. Outside, Dusty was standing by the broken fence, tail flicking at the flies. The old horse looked almost like a statue carved from sunlight and dust, faithful, patient, and useless in the eyes of the world. "Sell the place," Nathan said suddenly. "Take the offer, pay the debt, start over somewhere else. Wyoming isn't the whole world." Samuel rose, slow and deliberate. "This land is the only world I've ever known." He took his hat from the hook, brushed the dust off its brim, and walked out before the conversation could go any further. The drive into town was silent, except for the low hum of the old truck's engine. The road wound through fields that used to be green, now faded into gold and gray. Every fence post, every turn of soil seemed to whisper a story that no one wanted to listen to anymore. At the bank, the air was thick with the scent of paper and stale coffee. A young manager, barely older than Nathan, sat behind the desk. "Mr. Reed, we've been more than patient," he said, his tone rehearsed. "The interest alone—" "I know what I owe," Samuel interrupted quietly. "I just need time." The man's expression softened, but only slightly. "Time doesn't pay interest, sir. The property will go to auction if the sale doesn't close." Auction. The word stung like grit in his teeth. The Reeds had once bought land, not sold it. Now his family's legacy would be read out loud to the highest bidder like a used saddle. When Samuel stepped out into the daylight again, it felt thinner, harsher. He walked past the feed store, past the church, past the diner that hadn't changed since his father's time. Every face he met wore the same expression. Sympathy tinged with quiet relief. Relief that it wasn't their land on the line this time. Back at the ranch, Nathan was repairing the porch rail with a hammer that kept slipping from his hand. Samuel watched him for a moment, then said, "You think leaving will fix everything?" "It'll fix something," Nathan muttered. "At least we won't be stuck watching it die." Samuel didn't answer. He stepped down toward the corral. Dusty was waiting, ears flicked forward. The horse moved closer, pressing his muzzle into Samuel's chest as if sensing the heaviness in him. Samuel ran a hand through Dusty's mane, whispering, "They don't understand, old boy. It's not just about land." The horse exhaled softly, and Samuel felt it, something alive still breathing beneath all that ruin. That evening, he sat by the barn, watching the sun dip behind the Bighorn Mountains. Nathan joined him silently, arms crossed. "Dad," Nathan said after a while, "if you sell, at least we can stop fighting." Samuel didn't respond. He just stared at the fields, where shadows were crawling over the dry grass like a slow tide. "Maybe," he said at last, "but some fights are the only thing keeping a man standing." Nathan frowned. Then maybe that's why you're always so tired. The boy turned and walked back toward the house, the door closing behind him with a hollow sound. Samuel stayed a while longer, the chill of the evening seeping through his jacket. The sky burned red, then dimmed into a deep violet. He could hear Dusty inside the stall, scraping his hoof against the ground. Steady, rhythmic, restless. It was the same sound from last night, the same 3 beats. Samuel glanced at the barn door. Something about that sound pulled at him again, like an old song he couldn't place. He rose slowly, walked toward it. Dusty turned his head, eyes dark and wide, then stomped once more, harder this time. "Easy, boy," Samuel murmured, his hand on the stall door. "What are you trying to tell me?" The horse pawed again, scattering dust into the air. It shimmered in the dying light like gold dust, swirling low to the ground. Samuel frowned. The soil there looked uneven, sunken, just a little, but enough to notice. He crouched down, brushed the dirt with his hand, and felt something solid beneath the surface. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself. "Tomorrow, I'll see what's under here." Behind him, Dusty let out a quiet, almost knowing sigh, and the prairie fell still. Morning came with a thin frost that clung to the fence wire like forgetful breath. Samuel pulled on his coat and crossed the yard before the kettle had a chance to boil. He didn't want the comfort of coffee. He wanted answers. Dusty watched him approach, ears tilting toward the stall floor where the soil lay slightly caved, a shallow sigh in the earth. Samuel unlatched the door, stepped inside, and knelt. The ground was cool, damp beneath the top layer. He dug with his hands first, then with the old trenching spade he kept behind a beam. The blade met resistance, a plank, not rock. He cleared around it and found iron set into wood, the ghost of a handle buried under decades of silt and straw. He paused, palms dirty, heart traveling back through time without asking permission. "What are you, old man?" he whispered, unsure whether he meant the land or himself. Dusty breathed against his shoulder, as if keeping count of each second. Samuel pried at the seam. The wood groaned like a voice unused to speaking. A rectangle of dark opened its mouth in the stall, a pocket of air rising that smelled of oil, dry paper, and winters long gone. He coughed, then lowered the flashlight from his jacket pocket, its weak beam trembling down a short ladder into a room he hadn't known existed. He waited, listening. No snakes, no dripping. Only the hush of a place that had done its job. Stay hidden. Keep quiet. He tested the first rung with his boot. Solid. He went down, the light tracing rough walls and a square of floor, a root cellar once, maybe, repurposed. Shelves on one side held jars clouded with dust. Another wall kept a wooden chest, iron-banded and serious, like it had waited its whole life to be opened once. Beside it, a tin of matches, a stub of candle, and the kind of careful order that had "read" written all over it. His father had loved straight lines. His grandfather had worshipped them. He lit the candle, set it on an upturned crate. The flame steadied, and in that honeyed light he saw the first photograph. Men in wool coats, hats pulled low, a young woman holding an infant with a stubborn chin. Behind them, 4 horses stood square, winter-bellied and proud. Reed Ranch, 1910, penciled in the margin. The numbers were neat, the kind taught by a schoolhouse slate and a strict teacher who smelled of chalk and lye soap. Samuel reached for the chest. The lid resisted. He found a small lock, rusted but not broken, and pressed his thumb to it, as if a name might open it. When it didn't, he took the pry bar hanging from a nail and worked slow, respectful. The metal cried once and gave. Inside lay a stack of ledgers, a pocket Bible wrapped in cloth, and a notebook, stitched leather, rubbed soft by hands that earned their keep. He opened to the middle where the spine wanted to fall and found a line that made the candle seem to flare. If the snow takes the calves, we will breed again. If the well runs low, we will carry pails from the creek. If I lose faith, I will read this page and remember who I am. He sat back on his heels, the cellar's chill rising through his jeans. The handwriting was his grandfather's. He recognized the capital R that hooked like a spur. He skimmed entries. The blizzard of 29, the summer the locusts came, the day his grandmother birthed twins, while lightning walked the ridge. Between the tally of seed and the price of nails, the man had tucked small mercies. Dust took the topsoil, but left the roots. We are the same. A line so simple, it pressed heat behind Samuel's eyes. Footsteps sounded upstairs, light and impatient. "Dad?" Nathan's voice floated down, sharper in the quiet. "Truck from the sign company just past the gate. You want the for sale board taken down or not?" Samuel blinked up into the stall's rectangle of sky and straw. He wanted to say yes. Take it down. Burn it. Pretend they'd never nailed it up. But the bank's letters, the interest that grew like bindweed, the mortgage rates that climbed while the pasture withered, those were facts. No photograph erased them. No memory paid arrears. "In a minute," he called, and his voice bounced gently off rock and wood. "I'm looking at something." "What something?" Not accusing, not curious, just tired. "Your great-granddad's words," Samuel said, and before he could talk himself out of it, he added, "Come see." Nathan's face appeared above, framed by daylight, doubt already pulling at his mouth. "Is this another history lesson?" he asked. "Because the bank doesn't grade on legacy, Dad. They want checks. They want online banking confirmations and a decent credit score." "Ladder's steady," Samuel said, ignoring the barb. "Watch your foot on the third rung." The boy hesitated, then climbed down, boots thumping softly. He took in the small room with a single glance, the candle, the chest, the order, the photo, and for a fleeting second, something tender crossed his face, quickly hidden. "What is this?" "Someone who knew we'd need reminding," Samuel answered. He handed Nathan the notebook, open to a page where ink had pooled like a held breath. "When the drought took our mares, I borrowed a stallion from a neighbor who had less to spare than we did. We named the first foal Mercy." Nathan traced the sentence with a thumb he didn't realize was moving. He looked around again, this time slower. He noticed the inventory ledgers labeled by season, not year. He seen the Bible's corners worn to a shine and the neat list tucked inside it. Tools lent and returned. "Why hide this?" Nathan asked, softer now. "Maybe it wasn't hiding," Samuel said, setting the lid back on the chest but not closing it. "Maybe it was keeping, like canning peaches for winter, like farm insurance for the heart." Nathan huffed a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Insurance would have been useful up top, too." "We had that," Samuel said, and let himself smile once, quick. "Just not the kind that pays cash value." The boy shook his head, but the angle was different, less defiant. He lifted the photograph and studied the horses. "You think one of these was Dusty's line?" I think every good thing leaves a trail, Samuel said. The answer surprised him with its own certainty. They stood that way for a while, the candle shrinking, the room warming with their breath. The ranch above them creaked in the wind, old bones settling. It occurred to Samuel that whoever had built this cellar had done so with care not to disturb the stall above. He imagined his grandfather fitting beams around the shape of a horse, as if even then the animal's comfort had been a law. The thought put a strange, clean ache in his chest. Nathan put the notebook back, too careful for a skeptic. So, what now? He asked. We read and feel better while the foreclosure notices stack up? We sell the place and donate this to the museum? Is there a gold bar under the floor I'm missing? Samuel shook his head. There's something here we haven't held in a long time. He tapped the notebook. Proof we come from people who didn't quit. That doesn't fix Friday, Nathan said, but he sounded like he wished it did. No, Samuel conceded, but it fixes today. And sometimes today is the thing that gets you across to tomorrow. From above, Dusty stamped once, as if seconding the motion. They both glanced up. Both smiled without meaning to. Nathan climbed first, handing the photo up to his father so the corners wouldn't bend. When Samuel reached the stall, the light felt larger, the air less thin. He slid the hatch closed and pulled straw over the seam until it looked like nothing had ever been there. Not hiding, keeping. In the yard, the truck slowed by the gate, 2 men in neon vests stepping out with a post puller and a practiced indifference. Nathan eyed them, then looked at his father. The boy's chin lifted. A familiar reed gesture, lost for years, now trying its way back. What do you want me to tell them? He asked. Samuel ran a hand along Dusty's neck, felt the warmth, the living engine under hide. He looked past the men to the line of cottonwoods, to the thin silver coil of creek beyond, to the mountains that had never once leaned his way. The ledger in his head wrote its cold numbers. The ledger in his chest wrote another. Tell them to wait, Samuel said. 10 minutes. Nathan nodded and walked for the gate. Brisk, purposeful. Samuel turned toward the house, where the phone sat like a verdict. He didn't know what he would say, only that he would say it with the steadiness a man borrows from a horse. He'd call the bank again. He'd ask to restructure, to refinance, to stop the bleed. He'd call the co-op about seed prices, the extension office about drought, programs, the neighbor with the good hay about a payment plan. He'd call the estate planning attorney in town to ask about keeping the land in trust if the worst came. Maybe none of it would work. Maybe some of it would. He took one step and stopped. Out in the pasture, the wind combed a patch of grass a different way, and the sight triggered a memory. Not his, but one he felt as if it had worn his boots. Men riding fence in the dark with lanterns. A woman praying by a stove while snow drowned the world. A newborn foal shivering under a burlap sack, and living anyway. Not miracles, just choices added up. Behind him, Dusty lowered his head to the stall floor and pressed his muzzle where the hatch lay hidden. He exhaled, slow and sure, then lifted his face and looked at Samuel with that unblinking patience only a horse can manage. All right, Samuel said, as if the animal had argued him into it. All right. He started for the house again, the shape of a decision finding its bones inside him. Before he reached the porch, Nathan called from the gate. They want to know if it's temporary, taking the sign down. Samuel answered without raising his voice, words aimed at the men and the wind, and whoever might be listening underground. Tell them we're not selling, not yet. The man in the vest shrugged, then leaned his weight into the post puller. The board creaked and gave, the white letters briefly flashing like a surrender flag in reverse. Nathan carried the sign across the yard as if it weighed nothing. He leaned it against the barn, then came to stand beside his father. "I'm not saying it's smart," Nathan murmured. "I'm saying it feels like us." Samuel kept his eyes on the pasture, and the light skimming it like a gentle hand. "Good," he said. "Then let's start from there." He reached for the door, ready to make his calls, ready to lose some pride in exchange for time, ready to say please, words a reed rarely spoke. The screen squealed, the old wood framed him, and for the first time in months he recognized the man in the doorway, someone who could take a blow and stay on his feet. "Dad?" Nathan said softly, as if spooked by how quickly things can turn. "If they ask what changed, what do I tell them?" Samuel glanced back at the stall, at the quiet under the straw, at the horse who had put his hoof down and woken the past. "Tell them the truth," he said. "A horse found a room full of reasons." He went inside, lifted the receiver, and dialed. Night fell slow and heavy over the Reed Ranch, the kind of darkness that felt older than the mountains themselves. The wind was asleep, and every sound, the ticking of the old clock, the shifting of beams, the soft breath of the horse in the stall, seemed magnified, part of the same quiet pulse. Samuel sat by the kitchen table, the photo from the cellar laid before him, a lantern burning low. He traced the edges with his thumb until his eyes blurred, then folded the picture back into his shirt pocket, like something that still belonged close to the heart. He could not sleep. The cellar called to him the way a half-remembered song calls to someone who once knew the words. He took his coat, lit a fresh lantern, and stepped into the yard. Dusty raised his head from the trough, as if he'd been waiting all along. Samuel gave the horse a nod, a small acknowledgement between old souls. The stall smelled of hay and earth and time. Samuel cleared the straw from the trap door he'd hidden earlier and lifted it again. Cold air breathed up at him, smelling faintly of oil and metal. The ladder creaked under his weight, but it held. When his boots touched the dirt floor, the world above felt far away, like another life. He placed the lantern on the crate, where the candle had burned down to a stub. The flame threw golden tremors across the stone walls. He knelt beside the chest again. Something in him hesitated. Fear. Reverence, maybe both. Then he opened it fully. Inside were objects too deliberate to be random, a brass pocket watch still ticking faintly, though impossibly old, a set of spurs wrapped in cloth, and a tin box sealed with wax. He cracked it open. Inside lay letters, dozens of them, tied with a faded ribbon, the paper yellowed but intact. He lifted the first one and read the opening line under his breath. To whoever finds this, remember, this land was bought with love, not money. The handwriting was stronger than in the ledger, his grandfather younger, maybe newly married, still full of belief. Samuel read on, his voice trembling. The letter spoke of drought, yes, and hardship, but also of faith in small things, the way the soil smelled before rain, the miracle of a newborn foal taking its first breath, the laughter echoing across a field at sunset. These weren't instructions. They were reminders of how to stay human. One envelope had a darker stain along its edge, as if water or tears had once fallen there. Samuel hesitated before opening it. The words were brief, urgent, a confession of fear. The bank sent word again. They will take the land if I cannot pay by winter, but I can't tell her. She's still sewing curtains for the nursery. He stopped reading. The air felt thicker. The weight of history pressed against his lungs. He saw, suddenly, how close they'd come. His grandparents, how one bad season might have ended it all. And yet here he stood, proof that they had survived. Above him, faint hoofbeats sounded. A slow rhythm, Dusty pacing the stall. It made Samuel smile through the ache. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. "You always know." He placed the letters back, one by one, careful as if returning bones to the earth. Beneath them, his hand brushed against something small and hard. He lifted it into the light. A silver locket. Inside was a photo of a woman with bright eyes and a man's hand resting gently on her shoulder. There was something fierce and kind about her smile, something that looked like forgiveness. He closed the locket and slipped it into his coat. The air in the cellar seemed warmer now, almost protective. He leaned back against the wall, letting his head rest there, lantern light flickering on his face. For the first time in months, his mind was quiet. Not solved, not saved. Just quiet. When he climbed back up, the sky had begun to pale, and frost silvered the fence posts. Nathan stood by the door, hoodie pulled tight, eyes sharp with questions. "You've been down there all night," he said. "Looking for treasure?" Samuel shook his head. "No treasure. Just truth." "That's supposed to pay the bills?" Nathan asked, though his voice lacked its usual edge. "No," Samuel said, "but maybe it pays the part of us that forgot what this place means." He handed Nathan the photo of their ancestors. "That's your great-grandmother. She stayed here through everything, lost 2 crops, 1 child, and still she kept sewing." Nathan studied the photo, then looked away. "Maybe she didn't have a choice." "Maybe," Samuel said softly. "But she chose how to keep living. That's what matters." Nathan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You know what the realtor said yesterday? They can double the offer if we sign before the end of the month, enough to cover the mortgage refinance and maybe buy a smaller place near town." Samuel turned toward the horizon. The first rays of light spilled across the fields, making the frost glimmer like a thin layer of hope. "And then what? We build a new house on someone else's history? Plant a new dream that doesn't know our name?" Nathan didn't answer. He shoved his hands in his pockets and stared at the barn. "You really think all this," he gestured toward the empty land, "is worth holding on to?" Samuel didn't move. "I think it's the only thing that's still holding us." For a moment, they stood without speaking. The world was small, made of wind, wood, and silence. Then Dusty neighed softly, breaking the stillness. Samuel smiled. "I found something else," he said, reaching into his coat. He held up the locket. "Maybe that she left this for us to remember who we come from." Nathan took it, turning it over in his fingers. The metal was cold but light. "Feels strange," he murmured. "Like it's alive." "Maybe it is," Samuel said. "Maybe memories breathe if you let them." Nathan met his father's eyes for a long moment. "You gonna tell the bank we're still not selling?" Samuel nodded. "Not yet. I'll talk to them again. Ask about another payment relief program or ranch conservation loan. There's always another road." Nathan smirked slightly. You think a story and a few old papers can beat the market? No, Samuel said, but maybe it can remind us why the fight's worth it. He looked toward the fields, where the sun now touched the tops of the dry grass, turning them gold. Dusty stepped forward, resting his muzzle on Samuel's shoulder. For a brief second, man and animal stood perfectly still. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. I think, Samuel whispered, she'd want us to stay. Nathan didn't reply, but he didn't argue either. He followed his father into the barn, where light pooled gently over the straw, and the day began again, ordinary and sacred at once. The next evening arrived with a quiet kind of blue, the color that happens before darkness, but after light gives up. Samuel sat on the porch with the locket in his palm, its silver catching the last threads of sun. Nathan had gone into town to check on supplies, and for the first time in days, the ranch was still. The silence wasn't empty. It hummed, low and steady, like the heart of the land remembering itself. Samuel turned the locket over again. On the back, nearly invisible, a few letters had been scratched by hand. Beneath what we build, we stay. He whispered the phrase, uncertain whether it was a warning or a blessing. Then he rose, took the lantern from the post, and walked back to the barn. Dusty was there, head lowered, breathing slow. Samuel stroked the horse's neck, then lifted the hatch again. The air that came from below was cool and still, as if the room had been holding its breath since morning. He descended carefully, lantern first. The flame flickered across the walls, revealing something he hadn't noticed before, a framed scrap of parchment nailed to one beam. It wasn't paper from a ledger or letter. It looked older, rougher, words pressed into it with a fountain pen. For those who come after me, the land will not ask you to be perfect, only to stay. Samuel felt the back of his throat tighten. The handwriting wasn't his grandfather's. It was different, smaller, more elegant. He realized with a strange certainty it must have been his grandmother's. The thought of her down here, writing by lantern, maybe hiding these words while her husband worried over debts, made him suddenly, painfully proud. He sat on the crate, opened the notebook again, and began to read from where he'd left off. The entries grew more intimate now. Not just accounts of droughts and harvests, but of a marriage, of hope that bent but didn't break. One page stopped him cold. He says the land doesn't love us back, but I see him touch the foal's nose like prayer. Maybe that's what love looks like when you've run out of ways to say it. Samuel swallowed hard, the lantern shaking in his hand. It was her voice, speaking across a century, and it reached straight through him. He read until his eyes blurred again, until his heart felt like a door creaking open to light. Then he noticed something scrawled at the very edge of the final page, a line not quite finished. If you ever forget what this place was built on. The sentence stopped there, broken. The ink smeared by a drop that might have been water or grief. He whispered into the quiet. What was it built on, Grandma? The answer came in the smallest sound, hooves shifting above, Dusty moving restlessly. Samuel looked up, smiled faintly. Yeah, he murmured. Maybe you know. He closed the notebook gently and climbed back to the surface. Night had taken full hold now, and stars hung thick over the plains. The air smelled of sage and frost. He felt lighter and heavier all at once. Nathan's truck headlights appeared on the road, bouncing over the ruts. When the engine cut, he stepped out carrying a bag of feed and a box of old nails. Town's dead quiet, he said. They're all at the bar talking about the new agricultural subsidy program. Guess hard times make good politics. Samuel smiled faintly. Maybe that's one miracle they still sell cheap. Nathan set the bag down and leaned on the fence. Dad, I've been thinking. About the letters. About what you said. You really believe they mean something now? They mean everything, Samuel said simply. They're the map back to who we are. Nathan looked toward the dark field. But that doesn't pay the property tax, or keep the insurance premium from going up. I know. Samuel's voice softened. But maybe it gives us a reason to find a way. Maybe we try something else. Apply for that federal conservation grant you talked about, or rent part of the pasture to the wind turbine project. Nathan glanced over, surprised. You'd actually let them put those big towers on the ridge? If it keeps the land alive, yes. Samuel shrugged. Maybe it's time to let the wind help us for once. For a while, they stood there, watching the moon lift over the horizon like a coin tossed by some patient god. The light made the old house glow faintly, paint peeling, windows dull but still standing. Grandma wrote something down there, Samuel said quietly. She said the land won't ask us to be perfect, only to stay. Nathan tilted his head. Stay and what? Starve? Stay and listen, Samuel said. There's a difference. The younger man didn't argue. He walked into the barn instead, running his fingers along the stall wall. I always hated this place when I was a kid, he admitted. It smelled like work. And now? He turned toward Dusty, who lifted his head slowly, nostrils flaring. Now it smells like something I don't want to lose. Samuel smiled at that, quietly, the way men smile when the world shifts an inch toward hope. They worked together to close up for the night. The rhythm of tasks, shoveling straw, checking latches, pouring feed, was easy, familiar. When they finished, Nathan leaned on the stall gate and said, You know, the guy from the energy company is in town this week. I could talk to him tomorrow. Samuel nodded. Do it. Tell him we'll listen. All right, Nathan said, surprised by his father's calm. As they left the barn, Samuel looked back once more. The lantern still burned faintly down below through the open hatch, its glow seeping through the cracks like something alive. It looked, for all the world, as if the earth itself was holding a small, steady heart. He closed the door softly and followed his son toward the house. Overhead, a coyote called from somewhere near the ridge, and the sound carried across the fields like an old song that hadn't forgotten the words. Inside, Samuel placed the locket on the windowsill, where the moonlight struck it square. The silver gleamed, and for an instant he imagined two figures standing in the reflection. A man and a woman, shoulder to shoulder, facing the same endless stretch of land. He whispered into the stillness, We're still here. The words felt like a promise, or maybe a prayer. Morning came gray and windless, the sky a flat sheet of pewter. Nathan's truck was gone. He'd driven into town early to meet the energy rep, and the quiet that filled the ranch was almost too deep. Samuel brewed coffee, the smell drifting through the empty house, mixing with dust and the faint scent of oil from the lantern that had burned late. He poured 2 cups anyway, one for himself and one left steaming on the table out of habit. He took his mug outside. The porch boards groaned beneath his boots, same as they always had. Dusty stood out in the pasture, head bowed, tail flicking idly. From this distance, he looked timeless, a shape cut out of the land itself. Samuel thought of the note from the cellar. The land doesn't ask you to be perfect, only to stay. He was staying. But the question that lingered was, how long could staying still mean surviving? He walked down to the fence line, where frost still clung to the grass. The fields rolled out before him, gold bleeding into gray. Somewhere far beyond those ridges, progress was humming. Cities growing, wind farms spinning, renewable energy credits traded like promises on a screen. Yet here, nothing moved but the clouds. The sound of a car engine broke the silence. Samuel turned as a dark SUV pulled up the dirt drive. Two men in business jackets stepped out. Too clean for this place. The taller one smiled in a practiced way. "Mr. Reed? I'm from Windco. Your son Nathan mentioned we could discuss a potential land lease agreement." Samuel nodded slowly, motioning toward the porch. "Coffee's fresh." Inside, the men spoke in careful, smooth phrases. They talked about turbines, annual residual income, tax incentives, and the opportunity to be part of America's clean future. Their words spun fast, glinting like coins in sunlight. Samuel listened, hands wrapped around his mug, eyes flicking between their eager faces. "So," one said finally, "you could earn more in a year from this lease than your ranch has produced in 5. Minimal upkeep. No loss of ownership. It's progress, Mr. Reed. A win-win." Samuel stared into his coffee. "What happens to the land when I'm gone?" The man blinked. "Sir?" "When the turbines stop turning someday. When the metal rusts and the wind moves on. What then?" The question unsettled them. They exchanged glances. "By then," the taller one said, "your heirs will be set for life." Samuel smiled faintly. "You ever heard a field breathe after rain?" The man frowned. "I can't say I have." "Then you wouldn't understand," Samuel said gently, standing to pour another cup. "You see, this place doesn't just pay bills, it remembers." Nathan walked in just then, wind-burned cheeks, hands shoved deep in his jacket. "Dad, I told them you'd at least listen." "I did," Samuel said. "They make a fine case." Nathan looked between them. "Then what's the problem?" "The problem," Samuel said, "is that sometimes progress forgets to look back." The men thanked him politely and left, tires crunching down the drive. Nathan stood in the doorway, jaw tight. "You can't keep doing this, turning away every chance we get." Samuel sighed. "I didn't say no. I just said I need time." "Time?" Nathan's voice cracked. "We're out of it, Dad. The interest rate just went up again. Do you even know how close we are to losing everything?" Samuel didn't answer. The words were old, worn out from being true. Nathan stepped closer. "You read those letters like scripture, but they don't fix what's coming. You're clinging to ghosts." "Maybe," Samuel said. "But ghosts have a way of reminding us what it means to be alive." Nathan laughed, but it came out sharp. "You think holding on to dirt makes you holy? That horse, that barn, none of it's going to save us." Samuel looked past him, out of the window, where Dusty stood with his head turned toward the field, ears pricked. "Maybe not," he said, "but it's trying." Nathan threw up his hands. "I'm done arguing." He grabbed his keys. "If you want to sink with this place, fine, but I'm not going down with you." The door slammed, and the sound rolled through the old house like thunder over dry hills. For a long time, Samuel didn't move. He set his mug down, walked to the porch, and sat with his elbows on his knees. The air was cold enough to sting. He thought of his father, of the day they buried him behind the cottonwoods. He'd been about Nathan's age when that man first called him stubborn. It had sounded like an insult back then. Now it felt like inheritance. Dusty ambled closer to the fence, blowing soft plumes into the air. Samuel rose, walked out to meet him. "You've seen all this before, haven't you?" he murmured. "Fathers and sons pulling against the same rope." The horse pressed his muzzle to Samuel's chest, and for a heartbeat the man leaned into that warmth. Then he noticed something. Dusty's ears flicked. Toward the barn, body tense. Samuel followed his gaze. The hatch he'd left closed was open again, straw pushed aside. He frowned, walked over. The rope ladder swayed slightly, as if someone had just climbed down or up. He crouched, lantern in hand, and called, "Nathan!" No answer. He descended. Slow. The cellar air met him, colder than before. The crate, the chest, all as he'd left them, except the notebook lay open on the ground. He bent, lifted it. A page he hadn't seen before fluttered loose, one pressed between the back cover and the wood beneath. He read by lantern light, "To the one who stays when others leave. Do not mistake silence for emptiness. The earth keeps every word we speak in faith." His throat tightened. He could almost hear her voice now. His grandmother's, clear and calm as morning rain. Above him, Dusty pawed the floor once, twice. Samuel climbed back up, holding the notebook to his chest. The air outside felt different, charged, like a storm waiting somewhere beyond the hills. Nathan's truck was gone, a dust trail fading west. Samuel stood there a long time, watching the road, the horizon swallowing his son. Then he turned to Dusty and whispered, "He'll be back. They always come back when they remember what they left behind." He reached out, stroked the horse's mane, and looked toward the ridge where the first hints of lightning flickered in the distance. "Guess we're both waiting now, huh?" Dusty's ears twitched. The smell of rain was already rising. Wet soil, metal, memory. "All right," Samuel murmured. "Let's see what tomorrow brings." The storm rolled closer, slow and deliberate. In the distance, thunder broke like the sound of history, reminding him that nothing stays buried forever. By the next afternoon, the storm had passed, leaving the fields washed clean and shining. The air smelled of wet earth and iron. Samuel walked the fence line, his boots sinking into mud that squelched like breath returning to lungs. The world was softer now. Fragile. Dusty followed him at a distance, ears twitching at every crow's call. Samuel stopped near the north pasture, where the grass dipped toward the creek. The water there was running again, thin but alive. He crouched to touch it. The cold bit into his skin, but it made him smile. "Still here," he murmured, as if speaking to the ghosts below. When he returned to the yard, a truck he didn't recognize was parked by the gate. Black, polished, out of place among the mud and straw. A man leaned against it, mid-40s, suit jacket too neat, smile too confident. "Afternoon, Mr. Reed," he called. "Name's Carter Hale. I believe you've been expecting me." Samuel frowned. "I don't believe I have." "Oh, I think you have," Carter said, walking forward with boots too clean to belong here. "I represent a private buyer interested in your property. Your son mentioned the family's been struggling. I can make that go." "Away!" The words hit with a cold precision, each one sharp as a nail. Samuel's jaw tightened. "You've been talking to Nathan?" Carter shrugged, a little too casual. "Ran into him in town. Nice kid. Smart. He said you might need a partner, or a way out." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "Did he?" Carter smiled thinly. "I make problems disappear, Mr. Reed. Mortgages, back taxes, even—" He paused, letting the words linger. "Inheritance disputes. All I need is your signature, and we can start a cash offer closing within a week. You'll walk away debt-free, with enough left to retire anywhere you want. Florida, maybe? Nice weather, low property insurance costs." Samuel almost laughed. "I don't want Florida, I want my land." Carter's smile didn't falter. "Land doesn't care who owns it, sir. It just sits there. The market does care, though. And right now, yours is prime." He handed Samuel a folder thick with contracts, their edges crisp, as if cut from a different world. Samuel didn't take it. "Why here? There's bigger ranches down the valley." "Because this one's got water under it," Carter said, his voice dropping a note. "Old survey records show an underground stream. That's money, Mr. Reed, the kind we can tap, literally. Groundwater rights. Hydraulic resource development is the next boom." Samuel stared at him. "You want to drain what keeps this place alive?" "I want to put it to use," Carter said smoothly. "You'll get royalties. Monthly passive income. All legal. All beneficial." A gust of wind whipped between them, rattling the dry grass. Dusty snorted from the fence, stamping his hoof once, as if answering for the land itself. Carter glanced over, amused. "Stubborn horse?" "Faithful," Samuel corrected. The man smiled again, too practiced. "Faith doesn't pay the bank, Mr. Reed." Samuel finally took the folder, not to sign, but to flip through. Numbers, charts, the false promise of order. He closed it and handed it back. "I appreciate your time. You can tell your buyer I'm not interested." Carter tilted his head, mock sympathy in his eyes. "You sure? Because when the bank forecloses, they'll sell it for half this. You'll lose everything and still have nothing to show." Samuel didn't blink. Sometimes keeping nothing is the only way to stay yourself. Carter's smile faded for the first time. "Pride's an expensive hobby." "Maybe," Samuel said, "but it's the only thing I can afford to keep." The man slipped his folder back into the truck. "You'll change your mind," he said, climbing in. "They all do." When the engine started, Dusty shied away, ears flat. Samuel stood motionless until the vehicle disappeared over the ridge. The sound of tires faded into the wind, leaving behind the silence of a land not ready to give up. Nathan returned an hour later, boots caked with town mud. He saw his father by the fence, still staring at the empty road. "Who was that?" "Another man with a promise," Samuel said. Nathan sighed. "You didn't even listen, did you?" "I listened," Samuel said. "He wanted to buy the land for the water under it." Nathan blinked. "Wait, there's groundwater here?" "So they say." "That could change everything. Water rights are worth more than grazing permits. If we sold just a portion—" "No," Samuel interrupted. Nathan threw his hands up. "You don't even think anymore. You just say no." Samuel turned to face him, eyes steady. "Because every yes that sounds easy costs something we can't replace." Nathan shook his head. "You're living in a museum, Dad. You're so scared of losing the past you're letting the future rot." "And you," Samuel said quietly, "are so scared of standing still that you've forgotten what home feels like." The words landed between them, hard and unmovable. Nathan's shoulders fell. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. "You don't get it," he said, voice low. "I'm trying to save us." Samuel stepped closer, the lines in his face deepening. Then stop selling pieces of us to do it. Nathan looked away, his eyes wet but angry. You're gonna die here, and it won't mean a damn thing. He walked toward the barn, slamming the door behind him. The echo traveled through the boards like thunder trapped in wood. Samuel stayed by the fence until twilight. Dusty came up beside him, pressing his head against Samuel's shoulder. The gesture steadied him more than he wanted to admit. He looked up at the first stars flickering over the ridge. They think you're just a horse, he said softly. But you know better, don't you? Dusty exhaled, a warm cloud in the cooling air. Samuel smiled faintly. We'll show them, he whispered. One more time. In the distance, lightning flared again, but farther off now. Just a memory of a storm. Samuel turned toward the barn where his son had vanished. Through a crack in the boards, a faint light glowed. Maybe Nathan was reading by lantern. Maybe just sitting there angry. Either way, Samuel knew this fight wasn't over. He took a deep breath, the scent of wet grass and oil mingling in the night, and said to no one, if he's lost, the land will find him. It always does. The storm that had lingered at the ridge finally reached them that night. It came not as rain this time, but as wind, furious, sharp, and unrelenting. The windows rattled like old bones, and the barn groaned under the weight of its years. Samuel woke to the sound of Dusty's distant whinny and the slam of something heavy. He threw on his coat and ran outside barefoot, lantern swinging wild in his hand. The wind tore at him, flinging grit into his eyes. Across the yard, the barn door banged open, one hinge barely clinging. He forced his way through, pushing it closed, and saw Dusty panicked in the stall, nostrils flaring, eyes rolling white. Easy, boy, Samuel called, voice breaking against the roar. The old horse shifted, hooves scraping. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the roof, illuminating the stall, and the dust swirling in the air like smoke. Then Samuel saw it. A beam had loosened, hanging at an angle above the gate. He reached for it, grabbed the rope, and tied it off before it could fall. You're all right, he whispered, resting his forehead against the horse's. You're all right. When the wind eased just enough, he looked toward the trapdoor in the floor. Straw was scattered everywhere, and the hatch stood slightly open, creaking with each gust. Something about it made him uneasy. He knelt, pushed it shut, and latched it tight. Not tonight, he murmured. Let the past rest. Outside, the air filled with the scent of ozone and burning pine. A small fire must have sparked on the far ridge. He could see the faint orange flicker. He watched it dance across the horizon and thought of all the things that burned quietly before anyone noticed. He turned back toward the house. The lights inside flickered. Nathan's shadow moved past a window. Samuel took a deep breath and went in. Nathan was at the table, maps and notebooks spread before him. His eyes were red-rimmed but alert. I couldn't sleep, he said before Samuel could speak. I've been looking into that groundwater thing. Carter was right. There's an old report from the U.S. Geological Survey showing a freshwater channel beneath the property. It could be worth a lot. Samuel leaned against the wall, water dripping from his hair. You want to sell it? I want to use it, Nathan said. We could negotiate a mineral rights lease, Dad. Keep ownership, sell the water. We don't lose the land and we pay off the debt. Samuel stayed silent, staring at the window where lightning flared again. You ever wonder why your great-grandfather never touched it? Because he didn't know. Samuel shook his head. He knew. He just chose not to take what couldn't be replaced. Nathan rubbed his face, frustrated. You're impossible. Maybe, Samuel said softly. But I'm still here. The wind slammed against the house again, making the rafters shudder. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Nathan whispered, What if I'm not? Samuel's eyes met his son's. The boy's voice was quiet, but full of something raw, fear maybe, or exhaustion. You'll stay, Samuel said. You just don't know it yet. Nathan stood, fists clenched. You can't keep believing that some horse and a bunch of dead people are going to fix this. Maybe not, Samuel said, but they remind me who I am while I try. Nathan's jaw tightened. You'll lose this place. You'll die trying to hold on to it. Samuel looked toward the window, where Dusty was visible in the flashes of lightning. Head raised, body framed by chaos. Then I'll die knowing I didn't sell the last good thing left in me. Nathan didn't reply. He slammed his notebook shut and walked toward the door. I'm going to town. Maybe I can find someone who still wants to live. The screen banged behind him, swallowed by the wind. Samuel sat down slowly. The lantern flame wavered, then steadied. He felt tired, not of the fight, but of misunderstanding. He poured himself coffee, the sound small and familiar. Minutes passed. The wind began to die, leaving only the soft hiss of embers from the ridge fire far away. Samuel stood, crossed to the window, and saw something strange. The faintest glow coming from the barn. He stepped outside again, boots slipping in the mud. When he reached the barn, the glow wasn't fire. It was the lantern he'd left earlier, still burning through the cracks. He opened the door, stepped inside, and froze. Dusty was calm now, but staring at the floor. The latch on the hatch had come undone again. Samuel knelt, puzzled. The wind hadn't done this. It was too deliberate. He lifted the hatch, and the lantern below flickered brighter, illuminating the cellar. On the dirt floor, scattered in a pattern he didn't remember, were the letters and pages he'd left in the chest. As if someone, or something, had gone through them. He descended, pulse quickening. The air felt charged, electric. On the wall, one of the letters had been pinned with a nail that hadn't been there before. The paper trembled in the draft. He reached for it, held it close to the lantern, and read, If fire comes again, remember what cannot burn. His breath caught. He whispered, What can't burn? Dusty's hoof thudded above 3 times. The same sound from that first night. Samuel closed his eyes. The rhythm wasn't panic. It was guidance. He climbed back up, heart pounding. Outside, the fire on the ridge had grown larger, smoke trailing low and red. He stood in the doorway, wind whipping around him, the air full of ash. The world seemed split between what was burning and what was waiting to be born. He went back into the house and gathered the letters, the photo, and the notebook. He wrapped them in a tarp, placed them in a tin box, and carried it outside to the creek. The water was running high now, clear and cold. He crouched, slid the box beneath a rock ledge where the current would protect it. Just in case, he whispered. When he stood again, Dusty was beside him, the old horse soaked with rain and glowing faintly in the dawn light. Samuel rested his hand on the animal's neck. We're not done yet, he said. "Not while there's still something here that won't burn." The wind shifted, softer now, carrying the smell of wet ash. The ridge fire was dying, leaving behind a faint glow like the memory of courage. Samuel turned back toward the ranch. Smoke curled into the sky, and behind it the first pale light of morning rose. He looked at Dusty, then toward the road where Nathan had gone. "He'll find his way," Samuel said. "The land will call him back. It always does." He started walking, boots heavy but sure, leaving a trail in the wet earth that the sun would soon dry. Behind him, Dusty followed, one step at a time, through wind and ash and the quiet promise of another day. The next day rose in silence. No wind, no bird song, only the soft dripping of melted frost from the eaves. Samuel sat on the porch steps, rubbing his palms together to chase the chill. His eyes were fixed on the distant road, waiting for a dust trail that hadn't yet come. Nathan was still gone. The storm had passed, but its absence felt heavier than its fury. Inside the barn, Dusty shifted quietly, the sound of hooves against wood echoing like a heartbeat. The air smelled of smoke still lingering from the ridge fire. Samuel breathed it in, an old scent, one that always meant loss and renewal side by side. He rose, went to the creek, and lifted the tin box from beneath the ledge. The metal was cold and slick, water still dripping from its sides. He carried it back, wiped it dry, and set it on the kitchen table. When he opened it, the letters were safe, but one page had come loose. Creased, stained by the creek's touch. He unfolded it gently. At the top, in his grandfather's sharp script, was a date. October 21st, 1933. Below it, the words that would stop his breath. "If you are reading this, the land has called you back." He read on. The handwriting wavered, but held firm. "I don't know who you are, perhaps my son, perhaps his, but this ground will always know your name. When the time comes that the world forgets what soil feels like, you must remember. You must be the one to keep it alive." Samuel's throat tightened. He could almost hear the old man's voice, steady, measured, humble. He read aloud softly, as if to test the truth of it. "A man's worth is not in what he owns, but in what he refuses to sell." The words echoed through the empty house. By afternoon, clouds rolled back in, pale and thin. Samuel saddled Dusty and rode out toward the ridge where the fire had been. The landscape was blackened, trees standing like bones against the sky. Yet here and there, green shoots had already begun to push through the ash. He stopped, watching them tremble in the breeze. "You never quit, do you?" he whispered. He dismounted, crouched, and pressed his palm into the soil. Warm still, pulsing faintly beneath the surface. The land was healing. Maybe he could too. As he turned to leave, he saw movement down the road. A truck. Nathan's. It slowed near the barn, dust swirling around it. Samuel urged Dusty into a trot, heart thudding. When he reached the yard, Nathan was unloading a duffel bag, his face drawn but calmer than before. "I thought you were in town for good," Samuel said quietly. "I was," Nathan replied, "but something pulled me back." He looked up at his father, almost smiling. "Guess the land called." Samuel's laugh came rough, unexpected. "It does that." Nathan nodded toward the house. "I went by the library before I left town. They had microfilm copies of old county records, surveys, property deeds. You were right. Grandpa did know about the water. He just never claimed it. Why? Nathan shrugged. Maybe he thought it wasn't his to take. Samuel studied him. And what do you think? Nathan met his gaze. I think he wanted someone else to find it when they needed to remember why this place mattered. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. And I think I know how to save it, without selling it. Samuel raised an eyebrow. I talked to the county office, Nathan said. There's a new land conservation easement program. We can register the property as a heritage ranch, protected from development but eligible for renewable energy tax credits if we maintain it sustainably. The government covers part of the cost. We keep ownership. It's not much, but it's a start. Samuel blinked, absorbing the words slowly. You're serious? Nathan nodded. Dead serious. But they need proof the ranch has historic value. Records, artifacts, family documents. Samuel smiled faintly. We've got plenty of those. He led Nathan inside, set the tin box on the table, and began to show him the letters one by one. They read together, his grandfather's steady prose, his grandmother's quiet hope, their lives unfolding in ink and paper. As the light faded, father and son leaned closer, lantern flickering between them. When they reached the final page, Nathan turned it carefully. The back was blank, except for one small line written sideways, almost hidden. If you ever doubt, read this aloud. He frowned. Read what? Samuel pointed to the earlier entry, the one from 1933. Together, they spoke the words that had started it all. If you are reading this, the land has called you back. The house seemed to hold its breath. Outside, Dusty neighed softly, a single note that echoed into the dusk. Nathan smiled, voice breaking. You think he knew we'd find it? I think he hoped we would, Samuel said. For a long moment, neither spoke. The light dimmed, the air heavy with the smell of rain. Then Samuel reached out, placed his rough hand over Nathan's. We'll register the land, he said. We'll fight for it the right way. Nathan nodded, eyes shining. We'll make it work. Samuel leaned back, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in months. Your grandfather used to say every good thing comes back when it's needed most. Maybe that's what we are, something coming back. Nathan grinned through tears. Guess we are. Outside, the wind shifted, gentler now. The clouds parted, revealing a thin stripe of moonlight spilling over the barn roof. Dusty stood still in the yard, watching them through the open door. Samuel rose, opened the window wider, and let the cool air in. Smells like rain, he said. Real rain. Nathan smiled. Maybe it's time this land gets to breathe again. They sat in silence as the first drops began to fall. Soft, deliberate, like a promise. Somewhere beneath them, the creek ran steady, carrying with it the memory of everything that had endured. For the first time in a long while, Samuel believed in tomorrow. The following morning arrived clear, sunlight spilling over the hills like a long-awaited forgiveness. The storm had left behind a world scrubbed clean, the air sharp with pine and wet soil, the fences glistening with dew. Samuel woke early, as he always had, but this time the weight on his chest felt lighter. There were still bills on the table, still fences to mend, but something inside him had shifted. For the first time in months, he wanted to begin again. Nathan was already outside. Samuel found him by the barn, sleeves rolled up, fixing the hinge that had broken during the storm. It's about time this place stopped falling apart, Nathan said without looking up. His tone wasn't sharp, just quietly determined. Samuel smiled. Guess we've both been doing some fixing lately. They worked side by side for hours, mostly in silence, the easy kind that comes when words are no longer needed to prove anything. Dusty grazed nearby, his coat glinting copper under the sun. Every now and then, he'd lift his head, watching them like an old guardian taking inventory of progress. By midday, the barn stood steady again. Samuel leaned on the doorframe, wiping sweat from his brow. You always were better with a hammer than with patience, he said. Nathan grinned. Maybe I finally learned both. They ate lunch on the porch, sandwiches, coffee, and the sound of the world breathing again. Across the field, the grass swayed in slow waves, and for the first time, it felt like the land was exhaling relief. Nathan pulled a folder from his backpack and spread the documents out. I spoke to the county rep this morning, he said. They'll send someone next week to inspect the ranch for heritage land designation. Once it's approved, we'll qualify for federal sustainability grants and green energy incentives. It's not much, but it'll buy us time. Samuel nodded slowly. Time's all I ever wanted. Nathan hesitated, then said, I also called Carter Hale. Samuel's head snapped up. That snake from Windco? Relax, Nathan said quickly. I told him no deal, but I asked if they'd still be interested in leasing just the northern ridge for renewable grazing offsets instead of turbines. Turns out they're paying ranchers just to keep land undeveloped for carbon credits. We'd get paid to let it stay wild. Samuel blinked, processing. You're telling me someone's finally paying folks to do nothing? Nathan laughed. To do the right kind of nothing. Samuel leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. I've lived long enough to see stubbornness become strategy. For a while, they just sat there, the sound of cicadas filling the warm air. Then Samuel spoke softly. You know, when you left that night, I thought I'd lost you for good. Nathan stared out at the horizon. I almost didn't come back, but then I saw the ridge fire from the highway. It looked like the land was burning itself clean. I couldn't just drive away from that. Samuel's throat tightened. Maybe that fire burned something out of both of us. Nathan nodded. Yeah, maybe it left room for what needed to grow. The words hung between them, gentle and true. That afternoon, they walked the property together, marking the boundary lines for the conservation easement. Samuel carried a roll of orange tape, Nathan the stake hammer. Each post they set felt like a heartbeat, a quiet agreement between generations. When they reached the north pasture, Samuel paused. Your grandfather used to say every field keeps a secret. This one's probably got more than most. Nathan looked out across the land. I think we've finally learned how to listen. As they turned to head back, Dusty trotted ahead of them, mane rippling in the wind. He stopped by the old creek bed, lowered his head, and pawed gently at the soil. The sound echoed faintly. 1, 2, 3, like a signal sent across time. Samuel smiled, understanding. He's saying it's still alive down there. They stayed until sunset, the sky deepening into gold and violet. Nathan gathered the tools, but Samuel lingered, watching the way light bled across the grass. I used to think legacy was just about keeping something, he said. Turns out it's about knowing when to pass it on. Nathan's voice softened. You're not passing it alone. Samuel looked at his son, eyes glistening in the fading light. No, he said quietly. Not anymore. When they reached the house, the air was cool and calm. The kitchen smelled faintly of rain and coffee. Samuel lit the lantern and placed the locket on the table between them. Its silver surface caught the flame, reflecting their faces side by side. "Let's write our own entry," Nathan said suddenly. Samuel raised a brow. "You mean in the journal?" "Yeah, we'll add one more page, for whoever finds it next." Samuel hesitated, then smiled. "Go ahead." Nathan opened the old notebook, flipped past the weathered pages, and took up a pen. He wrote slowly, carefully, the way his great-grandfather once had. "Today, the Reed Ranch is still here. The fences are old, the debts are stubborn, and so are we. But the land breathes again, and so do we. If you find this someday, know that we stayed, not because it was easy, but because it was ours." When he finished, he slid the journal toward Samuel, who signed beneath the words with a steady hand. "There," he said softly. "Now it's official." Nathan smiled. "What's next?" Samuel leaned back, gazing out the window at the moon rising over the ridge. "Tomorrow we start planting again. Maybe oats, maybe hope." Nathan chuckled. "Guess both grow if you take care of them." Outside, Dusty whinnied once, a low, satisfied sound that drifted through the night. Samuel looked toward the barn, then at his son, and said, "He knows we're home again." Nathan nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "We all are." They sat in silence for a long time, 2 generations bound by the same breath of land and memory. The lamp flickered low, painting the walls in amber. Beyond the window, the fields shimmered beneath the moonlight, endless and forgiving. The ranch wasn't rich, wasn't saved from struggle, but it was whole. And for the first time in a lifetime, that was enough. Spring came slowly that year, as if the land itself were waking from a long, careful sleep. The snow melted in thin ribbons that fed the creek, and the wind turned warm enough to smell of grass again. For the first time in a long while, the Reed Ranch looked alive. Not perfect, not thriving, but alive. Samuel stood by the porch one morning, coffee steaming in his hand, and watched his son hitch the old plow behind Dusty. The horse pawed the ground, eager in his steady way. Nathan adjusted the straps with care that might have belonged to another man, a younger version of his father, maybe, or an older version of himself. The sight made Samuel's throat tighten. "Don't forget the far corner," he called out. "I know," Nathan answered, smiling faintly. "You've told me that since I was 10. "Still true," Samuel said, grinning. The soil turned dark beneath Dusty's hooves, rich and forgiving. The rhythm of the plow cutting through earth carried a music all its own, a low hum of renewal. Samuel joined in, walking behind with the seed spreader. The first handful of oats scattered like dust made of promise. He felt something he hadn't in years: purpose. By midday, the sun sat high, warm, but not cruel. They took a break under the cottonwoods, where the shade lay cool across their faces. Nathan tossed his father a canteen. "Feels different this year," he said. Samuel took a drink, wiped his mouth. "Because it is. We're not fighting the land anymore. We're working with it." Nathan nodded. "Feels like Grandpa's still here somehow." Samuel smiled. "He is. So is everyone who ever touched this soil with something more than greed." The words settled between them like quiet truth. That afternoon, they fixed the irrigation line near the creek. Nathan had borrowed equipment from the local agricultural co-op, paid for by the sustainability grant that had finally come through. The government paperwork was endless, but it felt worth it. Every form, every signature, another small act of faith. As they worked, Dusty stood nearby, swishing, his tail lazily, his shadow long on the ground. The horse was older now, moving slower, but he still carried the same steady calm that had guided them through storms and silence alike. "You ever think he knows more than he lets on?" Nathan asked, half joking. Samuel glanced over. "About as much as most people. Maybe more." Nathan chuckled. "If he starts talking, we're rich." "Wouldn't sell him even then," Samuel said softly. They laughed together, easy and unforced. For the first time, the ranch felt like a place of peace, not burden. Later, Samuel rode Dusty up to the ridge to check the fence. From there, he could see the valley stretching for miles, patches of green pushing through winter's gray. Beyond, the turbines from the Windco project turned slowly, pale blades carving the horizon. They looked almost beautiful from here, distant enough not to wound. He stopped by the marker where his father was buried, a simple stone under a cottonwood. Samuel dismounted, knelt, and brushed away the leaves. "We're still here," he said quietly. "Not because we're strong, just because we finally learned how to bend." A soft breeze stirred the branches, making them whisper overhead. Dusty snorted and lowered his head, grazing near the stone. Samuel smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "He'd be proud of you too." He rode back as the sun dipped low, the air thick with the scent of thawing earth and the faint sweetness of new grass. Nathan was by the barn, mending the gate. When Samuel dismounted, his son looked up. "You know," Nathan said, "for a place that almost died, this ranch looks pretty good." Samuel patted Dusty's flank. "Things worth saving usually do." They stood together watching the sky turn amber, then rose into purple. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes yipped, their voices carrying across the valley like laughter. Inside the house, the table was cluttered with papers, maps, letters, the newly signed Heritage Conservation Deed. Samuel glanced at it as he passed, a small pride blooming in his chest. They had done it. Against reason. Against odds. They had kept the ranch. When night came, he found Nathan on the porch, staring at the fields glowing faintly under the moonlight. "You ever think we'll be done fixing this place?" Nathan asked. Samuel lowered himself into the chair beside him. "The land doesn't want to be fixed. It just wants to be tended." Nathan nodded slowly. "Guess that's the difference between us and Carter Hale." "Yeah," Samuel said, voice soft. "We learned what enough looks like." They sat there in silence, two shadows on the porch, listening to the low sounds of the night. The chirp of crickets, the creak of boards, the quiet rhythm of Dusty's breathing nearby. After a while, Nathan said, "I never told you, but when I was gone, I kept hearing that line from Grandpa's journal, the one about the land calling you back." Samuel smiled in the dark. "And you listened?" "Yeah," Nathan said, exhaling. "Guess I finally did." The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of tilled soil, damp and alive. Samuel looked out over the field, the faint silver lines where they'd planted that morning catching the moonlight like threads of hope stitched across the earth. He turned to his son. "Tomorrow, we'll start fencing the new pasture." Nathan groaned softly. "You just can't let a man enjoy a moment, can you?" Samuel chuckled. "You can enjoy it while working. That's how you know you're a Reed." Nathan smiled. "Then I guess I am one after all." They laughed together, the sound mingling with the rustle of grass and the night wind, easy and unhurried. Above them, stars spread wide and endless, their quiet light resting over the land that had finally come back to life. And in the barn, Dusty shifted once more, lowering himself onto the straw, his breath steady and deep, the sound of peace itself. The summer that followed was unlike any Samuel Reed could remember. The rains came steady but kind, falling in rhythms that made the hills hum with color. The creek ran clear again, and the air smelled of sage and new growth. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel like it was dying. It felt like it was breathing. Samuel woke before sunrise, as always, but now his mornings carried a kind of peace that wasn't about work. It was about belonging. He'd pour 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for Nathan, and they'd stand by the porch rail, watching the sky lift its first line of gold over the ridge. Sometimes they'd talk. Sometimes they'd just let silence do the talking. The fields were green now, sown with oats that swayed in perfect rows. Nathan had taken to keeping the ledger, recording rainfall, crop yield, and the monthly renewable agriculture incentive payments they received for the conservation project. He was methodical about it, careful in a way that made Samuel smile. "Guess the Reeds are learning how to trust paperwork," Samuel joked one morning. "Yeah," Nathan said, chuckling. "Maybe miracles really do happen." They had built a small greenhouse near the creek with the help of a rural development loan. Nothing fancy, just wood and glass salvaged from the old shed. Inside grew tomatoes, peppers, and herbs that filled the air with sweetness. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and every plant seemed to grow as if grateful for the second chance. Samuel spent most days with Dusty, though the old horse moved slower now, every step a soft reminder that time asks for payment from all who stay long enough. Some afternoons, Samuel would sit in the shade by the barn, polishing the saddle or brushing Dusty's coat, talking to him like an old friend who already knew the answers. "You remember that cellar, old boy?" he said once, rubbing the horse's muzzle. "Feels like another lifetime now. But I guess that's how the land keeps us. It buries things until we're ready to find them." Dusty blinked slowly, resting his head against Samuel's shoulder. The sound of his breathing was deep and steady, like the ground itself sighing in contentment. One evening, as dusk pooled low across the valley, Nathan came out holding the old journal. "You know," he said, "I never finished reading the last few pages." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Thought we'd read them all." "There's one I missed," Nathan said, sitting beside him. He flipped to the back. The handwriting there was different, fainter, shakier. Samuel leaned closer. It was his grandfather's hand, the ink faded almost to ghost gray. Nathan read aloud, voice quiet but firm. "If you ever hear the land speak, don't be afraid. It only repeats what you've already forgotten. It will remind you to stay kind, stay humble, and remember where you come from. One day, someone will read this and understand. The land is never truly ours. We just get to borrow its heart for a while." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the chirp of crickets and the rustle of grass. Then Samuel said softly, "Sounds like something worth believing." Nathan closed the journal, exhaling. "You think he really heard it? The land?" Samuel looked out over the fields, now glowing under the last light. "I think he did," he said. "And I think we just did too." The sky turned the color of old copper. Dusty wandered up behind them, nuzzling Nathan's shoulder. The boy laughed, scratching behind his ear. "He's been quiet lately," Nathan said. "He's earned his rest. Samuel replied. We all have. That night, the temperature dropped, and the world turned still. The stars were sharp as glass above the horizon. Samuel sat alone on the porch long after Nathan had gone to bed. Dusty was in the pasture, head low, tail flicking lazily. Thank you, Samuel whispered to the darkness, for showing me what was worth staying for. Somewhere far off, a soft wind rose and rolled across the valley. It wasn't the cold kind that bites or the dry kind that steals. It was warm, full of motion, like a hand passing gently over the grass. Samuel felt it on his skin, heard it hum through the eaves, and for a second he could swear it carried a voice. Not words, but something older, something that sounded like yes. He closed his eyes and let the sound fill him. By morning, the sun rose pale and kind. Nathan found him asleep on the porch, Dusty standing near the steps, still as a statue. Morning, old man, Nathan said softly, patting the horse. You keeping watch again? Samuel stirred, opening his eyes. Still here? He murmured, smiling. Still here. Later that day, they buried a small box by the cottonwood, the same tin box that had once held the letters. Inside were new pages, copies of the conservation deed, photos of the ranch, a note from Nathan, and one from Samuel that simply read, "We kept it, for whoever comes next." They covered it carefully, smoothed the dirt flat, and stood together for a moment. Nathan looked toward the horizon. Think someone will find it someday? They will, Samuel said. The land always keeps its promises. The wind moved again, sweeping through the grass in slow, rolling waves. Dusty lifted his head, ears forward, eyes bright despite his age. Samuel reached out and stroked his neck, whispering, "You did good, boy." As the afternoon faded into gold, Nathan saddled Dusty and helped his father mount. They rode together through the open field, the horizon wide and forgiving. Neither spoke. The air smelled of earth and sunlight, and every sound, the soft rhythm of hooves, the rustle of grass, felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. When they reached the top of the ridge, Samuel stopped, looking out over the valley that had held 3 generations of their name. His voice was quiet, but sure. We're just another story this land decided to tell. Nathan nodded. And it's a good one. They turned back toward the ranch, the fading sun behind them, the future waiting ahead. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Just type, "I felt it." Your words keep these stories alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next tale from the heart of the American land.